Please sit down. Still not used.
Well, oh yes, it works. Now I see it, yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear guests, today we've got rare chance of being present at the lecture how to be a practical chief executive officer that will be given by perhaps one of the most prominent practical chief executive officers, Mr. Lawson. So, before we get started, I'd like to describe Mr. Lawson's career so that you can understand what unique chance you have and what unique knowledge and experience we're going to share. So, correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
Mr. Lawson has been closely involved in the evolution of Russian banking system since early 1990s, when he joined Citibank Russia, the president of the bank. In 2000, Mr. Lawson became the first senior advisor and subsequently chairman of Delta Bank. Then, after working briefly as the director for external relations for Trust Bank in 2003, Mr. Lawson became the first foreigner to be executive chairman of a Russian-owned bank, that is Soyuz Bank, part of Oleg Deripaska's Basic Element Group. It happened in 2004. In his banking career, Mr. Lawson spent 25 years total with Citibank, serving in 11 countries in a series of management positions, including head of corporate banking in Kenya, Egypt, Norway, Italy, and country head roles in Russia and Puerto-Rico. In addition, Mr. Lawson was a senior credit officer for 11 years and director of structured finance in Citibank London for 5 years. In the late 1980s, during which he participated in underwriting and restructuring debt for acquisitions totaling $11 billion US. In 2006 and 2007, Mr. Lawson was nominated as the Russian Banker of the Year, an annual award recognizing outstanding contributions to the Russian banking sector, which was awarded by a committee comprised of the Central Bank of Russia, Russian Ministry of Finance, and the Association of the Russian Regional Banks. So, what is perhaps most important for us is that Mr. Lawson acts as occasional lecturer for the MGIMO University. So, and before I give the floor to Mr. Lawson, I'd like to offer my personal thanks to my colleagues for organizing the lecture of such nature. Thank you very much for your support and tremendous work. Well, and it now gives me great pleasure to invite Mr. Lawson to address the audience. Thank you so much.
I get bored listening to my CV, let alone you guys, so I'm sorry it takes so long. It gets longer as you get older. So I think I've probably reached the point at which I no longer enjoy listening to what I've done. Today I work as an executive director for Ernst&Young. In that capacity, I manage the UK Business Centre for them, which is everything that we do between Russia and the UK and between UK and Russia. I also get involved in their advisory mandates on banks. As of next Thursday, I'll be the chairman of the Finance and Investment Committee for the Association of European Businesses, and I've also joined the supervisory board of the Independent Directors Association. So now I'm done. Now you know everything you need to know about me. Apparently, I discovered that I'm very Googleable. This is a new adjective, so I'm a Googleable guy, apparently. Well, the first thing I want to say is that my proudest moment as an academic came when I got one of these. Here is my propusk. I'm extremely proud of it. It unfortunately runs out at the end of May. So now I have to know that I have to try and do a good job, otherwise I guess I don't get another proper score. I'd like to spend today talking to you about how to be a practical CEO. Okay, so the first question, how many people in the room want to be a CEO? Only half the room. What do the rest of you want to do? Work for the guys that want to be the CEOs, perhaps? Listen, actually, I think, let me just start by saying, being a CEO isn't for everybody. So actually, that's perfectly reasonable that half of you don't want to be CEOs. I can't guarantee that the other half that do want to be CEOs are going to end up as CEOs. But the CEO role doesn't suit everybody. And I think that the fact that people say, oh gosh, you know, CEO, that means you're the top of the pyramid, this must be a great place to be. Well, I believe in anything that you do, any job that you do, anything that you do with your career, you've got to make sure that it fits you. Because if it doesn't fit you, it's like a bad pair of shoes. You know, it might look good to start with, but it's going to give you a blister. And you get one go at life. So there's no point in saying to yourself, because everybody else thinks that being the CEO is the right thing to do, that's what I need to do. So the first lesson about being a practical CEO is don't desire to be one unless it suits your characteristics. Let me start with a little quotation. Leaders are visionaries with a poorly developed sense of fear and no concept of the odds against them. You know, actually, if you said to anybody that just took over the role of CEO, okay, congratulations, this is what you've got to do, most people would sort of swallow hard and think twice. But in the nature of practical CEOs, these are people who generally are prepared to take that risk. And all that I can do today is to spend some time talking about two very separate parts of this. You see, there are characteristics and there are skills. And characteristics are those things that you develop as a personality over time. Those characteristics tend to come from experience. And as those of you who've been to any of my other lectures will know, I urge all of you to fail. Or at least once or twice, but to learn from your failure. Because in my experience, in my career, I didn't fail for a while, and then when I finally got round to failing, and everybody does at some stage, I didn't actually learn the lesson, and I had to fail a couple of times before I learned it. But characteristics are those parts of your character that develop through experience. Skills are those parts of your knowledge that you can go ahead and learn. Now, short of giving you all a very hard time in here, locking the doors and not feeding you for a day, I can't really give you much of an experience other than having to listen to me for an hour or two, which, you know, depends how you feel about that. But what I can try and do is I can try and pass on a few experiences, but a few skills as well, which I'll run through. So first of all, let's talk about what is the difference between, what is the role of a CEO, who are the constituents, by which I mean who are the people that get involved in this, who wants what from whom, because this is a two-way street. It isn't that I get to choose what I want and nobody else gets to choose what they want. There are two sets of components to this. Critically, I want to talk about this difference between skills and characteristics. And then if we have time, seeing as how half the class want to be CEOs, I guess the other half of the class can leave. But I'll run you through a first day checklist and I'll give you an idea of what a day in the life of a CEO feels like. Generally, it feels like a long day, because it is. So, the first thing I want to say, you are not a manager as a CEO. You are not some sort of super manager. You are a leader. And there is a big gap between leadership and management. Now, what happens, unfortunately, to leaders for the first time as they get made leaders, is that generally they're very good managers. And they've been somewhere and they've done such a good job that their manager has said this person should be promoted, they should become a leader. And then, and by the way, I'm talking of personal experience, and then what happens is they move into that leadership role and they rely on the skills that have been so useful to them as managers. But you have to be able to disengage as a leader. You have to be able to put some space between how you manage day to day and how you lead long term. Because a critical part of this is about the horizon. So when I talk about a leader having a long horizon, it means that you manage in blocks of time of a year, maybe 2, maximum 3. You lead in terms of a strategic vision that has to be 5, 10, 15 years. Now, a strategic vision isn't something that you do once and you never redo it. Obviously, environments change, opportunities change, and you need to adjust your strategy to make that change work for you. But there is a big difference between tactics and strategy. If you constantly change your strategy, it's no longer a strategy, it's a tactic. And so as a leader, one of your principal roles is to stand back and say, what is it that we need to achieve over a length of time? What are the investments that we need to make now in people, in fixed plants, in research and development that may not pay off this year? If you want a little commentary on what I've learned as 16 years as a CEO in Russia, one of the issues that Russia faces and will continue to face is how management and shareholders in the country stretch their horizons long enough that these type of strategic decisions can be made in a way that they allow time to develop. And as you now know, and as is very well publicized, one of the priorities of your country today is to diversify your economy away from extractive industries. Well, that isn't going to happen overnight. And even if you're successful, the change in your GDP composition is going to take time. And it's going to take this long-term vision and a commitment to that vision to be able to achieve it. And the role of a leader is to stake out. I've used the analogy before. A strategy is like deciding as a sailor which port you want to end up in. As you sail towards that location, you may have to tack in different directions according to the wind, but you must always know which port you're headed for. And by the way, you better also know which port you left from. If you don't know where you are when you start and you don't know where you're going, you won't get there, I can assure you. I teach strategic risk management here, and I've enjoyed the course enormously. I hope my students have too. And that course about risk management, one of my main themes in that course is risk management is not about minimizing risk. People have this idea that risk management is about how do I avoid risk? No, you're not going to get very far if the only thing that you do is try and avoid risk. What you need to do is maximize the return given your risk criteria. And to achieve that objective, you first of all have to define which risk and what level of return you require for that risk. And in fact, at Ernst&Young, we've developed a whole approach to that goes through a logical process and causes you to validate that with the shareholder. But there is another misconception. And that misconception is there's a guy in the corner and it's his job to do the risk management. Normally this is a guy that looks very nervous, he's sitting all alone in a windowless office, and it's his job to worry about risk. Wrong. It's the CEO's job to worry about risk. It is his role to establish what the return requirements are for the organization and to adjust the amount of risk accordingly. All risk you can avoid, mitigate, or exploit. If you want a riskless business, go ahead. But don't expect to be in business in 5 years' time. The only way you make money is by taking risk, and now you have to decide how much and where. So, you are, as CEO, the primary risk manager. The next is that you're the primary salesperson. And you may be selling that to your employees, you may be selling it to your customers, you may be selling it to your shareholder to get more investment. But you represent the company. And another thing I say to folks is, you don't hang up your CEO job title. It isn't a hat. You don't finish the day and you put your hat in the office and then you go off and get drunk at the bar next door, roll around and expect not to be seen as the CEO of your company. You're the company CEO no matter what you're doing. And in fact, I tell the story, and apparently as I'm a Googleable person, you can see it for yourselves. When I was running HSBC, I answered the phone to a journalist, and the journalist's question was, is it true that HSBC is opening a private bank? And I said, well, I can't comment on that, but I think you should call me back in a few months. The next morning, the head of the private bank ran into my office waving a copy of the magazine, of the newspaper, saying, what is this? In big headlines, Stюart Lawson declares opening of private bank. That was okay, well, sort of. But going along with it, there was a picture of me, which you can find, of me looking like some maniac, laughing my head off, looking completely out of my head. Well, guess what? What was I doing? Was I drunk? Not really. I had just made, my son is 13 years old, I think at the time he was about 9, and I had just completed a checkmate, and I was so delighted that I was laughing. But the image could be used out of context. And so never think that you can hang up the role of CEO. You're always you actually can't protect against situations like that. But just be aware, it's an ongoing role. Here I talk about being an arbiter of the senior management. That means that you have to make some difficult decisions. You are not going to win the votes of all your managers. You cannot be the popular guy on campus. If you love being loved by everybody, you're out of luck. That doesn't mean to say you have to be hated by everybody. That doesn't mean to say that you have to be aggressive with everybody. It just means you're not going to please all the people all the time. Because one of your jobs is to decide who to promote, who to demote, who to hire, who to fire. And none of those, except for the promotion ones and hiring ones, the demotion and firing isn't going to go down well. And you need to create a policy whereby whatever organization you're running is under control. Because how can you lead an organization if there's no controls? And again, this isn't something that is necessarily a fun pastime. But if you don't create a controlled environment, you haven't got a company to run. So who are these people you have to worry about? There's a lot of them. There's far more of them than you think when you start the job. The most important set of people that you have to worry about are your shareholders. If you don't have the support of your shareholders, you don't have a job. So before you start, before you do anything else, make sure you've had an open dialogue with your shareholders so that you understand what their expectations are and make sure that they understand what yours are. Unless you have that open conversation, there can be misunderstandings. The next is that you have a board. You can try and be a one-man CEO or one-woman CEO, but I don't recommend it. You see, you're as good as your ability to leverage your time. Here's a fundamental truth. You don't have enough of it. There is no way that any of us have enough time to complete the business goals that we're going to have. And the only way that you'll succeed in that endeavor is by being able to communicate those goals, motivate others to follow you, and to complete tasks and objectives that you set for them. So your executive directors who run your business for you, for the shareholders, you better have them on side. By the way, one of the things I've also learned along the way is you're not necessarily able to convince everybody. And what seems to happen, a friend of mine who's the chairman of a big bank here came to speak at one of my courses, and he said, don't spend all your time trying to convince the one person in the room that disagrees with you. And then it was like, yeah. And I've been in business for 30 years. And I realized when I looked back over some of the situations that I had spent an inordinate amount of time with a guy in the corner who just wouldn't accept my point of view. This guy, my friend, would say, give everybody an opportunity to get on the train, and then when the train leaves the station, you're either on the train or you're in the station. And you have to define that moment. Now, that isn't to say that you should do that straight away. You need to give people time to understand what your point of view is and where you want to go. But once you've defined that, you have to have your team on board. Clearly, you also need your staff on board. Now, as this goes further out, as this leverage effect goes further out, your ability to control what your directors say and do is diminished. Obviously, I can control what I do, but can I control what you do? And this is where it comes back to that being an arbiter of management. If you aren't an arbiter of management and you don't control your directors, the infection will spread throughout their staff. And so what you have to do is you have to have complete confidence. Don't have around you management that you don't have confidence in, because you'll be second-guessing them the whole time, which will diminish their authority. Nobody wants to work for a boss that's constantly checking with their staff whether or not they're working correctly. So you have to empower your management, and you have to make decisions to ensure that they communicate well with staff, and make sure when you're in the elevator with any member of staff, or if you're in the bathroom and you're washing your hands, anywhere, talk to them. Because the worst thing that you can do is put a glass wall between you and everybody else. And I can tell you that one of the most effective communication tools that you have as a leader is actually how you interact day to day. Because people carry those stories through the generations. I've told this story before. I was working as a corporate bank head in Cairo in 1984. In 1984, where were you guys in 1984? In 1984, I was running a bank in Cairo, and into my branch came the chairman of Citibank. He hadn't called ahead. He hadn't made a big deal. He wasn't surrounded by security. There was no big car outside. He just walked in jeans, and he tried to cash a check. And when he came up to the cashier and he said, could you cash the check? And she said, ID, please. And it said, John Reed. She said, don't be ridiculous. He's the chairman of the bank. What did John Reed do? He explained that he was John Reed and that, yes, he was the chairman of the bank. And that story was passed from one person to another till today. And it demonstrated a very normal human approach of a very senior guy. So always try and be pleasant, communicative, and normal in any interaction, no matter where it is. Your suppliers have to believe in you, otherwise they won't give you trade credit. You have to project an image. The public. Now, this is a very general term, the public. And this is where the whole issue of PR and management of PR and image comes into play. And if you have an image of PR as a pretty young girl in a short skirt running around in a cocktail party, you've missed the point. This is a very serious business. And it's a business where the genie, once the genie comes out of the bottle, I don't know if that translates, is it genie and genie? The genie in the bottle? The ghost that comes out of the, yeah, okay, just checking. So when the genie is out of the bottle, it's extremely difficult to put it back in again. And you had better control when it comes out, because once it's out, you have a whole set of new issues. And this comes down to something else I talk about in risk management, which is one risk plus another risk doesn't equal two risks. One risk plus another risk might equal 20 risks. And you may not know, as you add those two risks together, where that chemistry will go. So PR and how you manage the public is critical. And you know, it's the off-the-cuff remark at a conference. It's that casual conversation when you're with a journalist and the journalist you haven't made it clear, or you don't know the journalist well enough, and no journalist is really off the record. I mean, if you know the journalist well, yes. If you don't know the journalist well, saying you're off the record doesn't make it so. I have a friend who lost their job because they were in a room that had been sworn to secrecy, and one of the people in that room blogged what they said. Now, given that I'm apparently live on the internet, I understand that this is not a secure room. So some of the stories I might otherwise tell, I'm sorry, I'm not going to tell them. But you really have to be very careful. Regulators. If you run a bank, you're not running anything unless the central bank tells you to, tells you that you can. At Citibank in '97, when I was setting up the bank, I sort of forgot about Russian accounting. Well, we had to completely redo all the accounts. And for a couple of years, I was definitely not very welcome. It wasn't the reason I left. It had nothing to do with that. It was lucky that I left, however, because I'd ignored a key requirement of the central bank. When I came back to Russia, you can be sure, I understood that your regulators are front and center. And I actually, when I went back to be the chairman of my fourth bank, the gentleman at the central bank said, Mr. Lawson, nice to see you. We recognize your signature. So regulators you had better keep on your side. And the same obviously goes with tax and government. So there's a final one, which if you work in a large international organization, you better learn how to deal with, and actually probably any large organization, whether international or not, is matrix management. Because there are a lot of people outside of your sphere of control who will get involved in your decisions. And you need to influence them in such a way that they will agree to your policies. It's quite complicated. Do you know, the trouble about this is that I can just lecture you for 2 hours, at which point at some point you're going to fall asleep, or we're going to have to get into some sort of dialogue. So please, at any point, if there's anything that you want to, is there any questions, any points of view you want to raise at the moment? Because I'm much more comfortable if we can get into a dialogue. Anybody got any questions about what I've been talking about? That's why I died. I have some questions. Nobody's got any questions. You all agree with me, this is the way to be a CEO. Okay, well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to go straight to characteristics and skills, which is this is where I'm going to be able to give you some pointers on how to be a CEO. But before I do that, I'm going to talk about some characteristics. These are things that I can't tell you how to do. These are things that you're going to have to work out for yourselves. And you're going to have to look in the mirror with a bright light and decide whether these are things that suit you or not. First of all, integrity. I haven't given any speech ever about leadership or management where I haven't started with a clear statement that you have either got it or you don't have it. And if you've got it and you break it, putting it back together again is very, very complicated. Now, one of the things that's complicated about this integrity issue is you have to decide for yourself what your personal integrity environment is. Because you have to think about this. One of the ways I think about this is I was sent around the world to 10 or 11 different countries, And it was my job to be able to work out which way was up. Which things were things that you could do, which things that you couldn't do, and lines you couldn't cross. Clearly, culture by culture, some of these things may differ. But the core element of what you will allow yourself to do and allow yourself to have done on your behalf, and there's no difference, those are things that you have to make up your own mind about. And clearly it is complicated in environments where it isn't black and white, and you can just operate in the white and not worry about the black. Commitment. You're not going to get through this job. You're not going to be able to convince other people to follow you unless you have a complete commitment to your goals. One of the ways I've described this, and I, by the way, in the 25 years I worked for Citibank, for about 14 years, I was a crisis manager. And a crisis manager, in those terms, is one manager who's put into situations that have deteriorated to the point of breakage. Normally it is when loan portfolios blow up, and when processes fall apart, and when management has lost control of the environment. And my job was to bring that environment back into control and to refocus it. Now, if you ask me where I got some of my bad habits as a manager from, when I say bad habits as a manager that prevented me from moving easily into a leadership role, it was because as a crisis manager, you don't listen to anybody else. You form a point of view, and then you force everybody in the room to follow your point of view. I would like you to picture the scene of a fireman arriving at a fire. If the fire is already burning, he isn't going to stand there and turn around to the crowd and say, what shall we do about it? He's going to turn to his people and say, you do that, and you do the other, and he's going to bring the fire under control. Now, the problem with that is that that isn't a very listening environment, nor a very delegating environment in terms of real delegation. And when I talk about commitment, I can tell you that to change a group of, say, 50 people from doing one thing that they've been doing for 5 years to doing another thing that you want them to do within a 14-month time frame, you have to force those people to push the rock up the hill to get to the top of the hill so that the rock will go the other way down. And the number of times that I have seen people who have attempted and have tried very hard and have got 3/4 of the way up the hill with that rock, but have run out of energy, commitment, and a desire, an appetite to succeed, and the rock falls back down again, the second time that you try and make that change is twice as hard. And almost certainly you won't do it. So you have to have this complete commitment. Judgment and wisdom. Hey, okay, let's do that. Let's do judgment and wisdom. So we've got a couple of minutes. How do we do this? Okay, I'm going to tell you a couple of stories, and then you're going to have some judgment, and you will have some wisdom. Sorry, it doesn't work like that. This isn't something, judgment and wisdom isn't something, actually, do you know the one good thing about getting old is, you know, you get old and then you have the wisdom to realize you can't do what you used to do. That's the plan, at least. So I can't help you with judgment and wisdom. I can help you with some of the tricks about how you can create a view on people, for instance, and I'll try and talk about that. But this is something I'm afraid you're going to have to acquire yourself. And here I've said patience and impatience. You have to be patient with some situations, and you have to be completely impatient with other situations. Anybody that's ever worked for me will tell you that there is a phrase that was used in almost every meeting when I started in any change situation. And the phrase was, we're working on it. So picture the scene. I walk into the room. I suddenly have taken command of a business, and I've asked you and you and you to do something. And then we meet again in 2 weeks' time. And I say, so, where are we on this project? We're working on it. It means, that's a jolly good question. We haven't really done very much, and can we talk about something else? So in those situations, you need to be extremely impatient. And in other situations, you better be patient. Actually, there's something here that I haven't put in here, which I think is very important as well, which is cultural sensitivity. Because this is particularly true if you are in an international environment. Let me tell you a story. In 1981, I was sent to, where were you all in 1981? In 1981, I was sent to Kenya. And I was told, Kenya is the most stable country in Africa. I was 27 years old, and I was really enjoying my new job. On August the 2nd, 1982, I was driving back from a nightclub at 3 in the morning, not in great shape, and I noticed a group of people waving at me, so I waved back, and then they waved back, and then I realized they were waving guns, and it was a coup. And in 1982, in August 2nd, 1982, the Air Force tried to take over Kenya. Well, they killed a few people, everything got pretty nasty, and suddenly our portfolio, which had been terrific, was no longer terrific. And I had to start collecting debts. So I got my group of young African managers together, and I decided that we were going to now go after some very bad creditors because the situation had got really bad. And I turned to Kyoko, a pleasant guy, and I said, I want you to collect this debt. It was a debt from a saw mine, a wood mill, a wood mill, they chopped up wood. And I said, go off and do it. 2 weeks later, how's it going? I'm working on it. No, Kyoko, I want you to go out there and I want you to get this money back. 2 weeks later, how's it going? I'm working on it. No, Kyoko, you don't understand. I want you to get the money back. Finally, one of his colleagues came up to me and he said, do you realize that you have asked Kyoko to get money back from his chief of his tribe? And the chances that he's going to go up and ask for money back from the chief of his tribe on behalf of an American bank and some screaming 27-year-old are 0. And I had not even understood, I hadn't taken the time to understand the relevance of the tribes, to understand who the borrowers were. I was just dealing with it as if none of that actually had any relevance. And of course, the point here is, some of that is very relevant and some of it is irrelevant. And sometimes when you get into cultural situations, people use the culture as an excuse. Oh, we don't do that here in Greece. Oh, no, in Norway, we never do that. Well, you know, the fact is that if you then buy off on all of these things that they don't do in all these different countries, how do you impose a global process? So clearly, it is this balance between what is a global process, a global bank, and what is the local cultural environment. Perseverance, it's sort of like commitment. It's just this business of when the times get very dark, when the days are long, you just have to, you know, it's just tough. And there's no way around it. People have, you know, when people, young people, think about their career, they think it's a flight of stairs. Well, better still, perhaps, an escalator. You know, you get on, you go up. And all you have to do is get on in МГИМО, great university, and you'll pop out at the top. Well, first of all, life's not like that. And actually the way it works is that you'll go up for a while, then you'll go flat for a while, then you may go down for a while, and then you go up again. And it's easy when you're going up, because there's hard work that's paid off by promotions and bigger jobs and better cars. It's not so easy when things are flat for 3 or 4 years, and it's worse still when things go down. And you have to decide for yourselves whether or not you have the staying power for the periods where it doesn't go up. Now, you know, I would also acknowledge that I come from the age of the dinosaur. You know, we still were inventing fire when I was starting at your age. The fact is that the commitment to a corporate has changed. And as you now look at the world, you look at it through an egocentric, and I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that you put yourself at the center of the universe. You see, when I was starting to work, I had the pathetic fallacy of believing that a corporate was actually something with a soul. A corporate can have a soul, but the reality is it is there for economic interests. And you have to decide whether your interests and those interests of the corporation match. Treat everybody equally, full stop. Color, race, religion, whether they're green, whether they have 3 arms, 2 heads, doesn't matter. You have to approach your attitude to people and the way that they work for you on an equal basis. And I'm afraid that that sometimes means you can't make allowances. By the way, don't think you can have best friends either. If you're the CEO, one of the most damaging things you can do is to have a best friend in the management team. What happens when you're somebody's best friend of the boss? You're the teacher's pet. And people become jealous, and then that jealousy translates into a negative environment. And I've learned this over time, that it is much better to stay remote. And I don't mean that in terms of that glass barrier between you and people. I just mean that you can't show a particular, even if you like one person more than the other, you have to deal with everybody on an equal basis. Courage. All of this takes courage. So that's the stuff you have to learn by yourself. Can't help you with that. Now I'm going to give you some useful skills. If I can't communicate with you, it's not going to go very far, is it? No matter what I'm thinking, you're not going to be thinking anything that I'm thinking because we're not communicating. So the first thing we better work out is, can I communicate in an effective way? And before I communicate in an effective way, I better have something on my mind. You know, there's no point in communicating confusion. I think we should either go there, or perhaps we should go there, and I'm not sure. I'm very concerned. I'm a little nervous. Now, what is it that you're communicating? The only thing you're communicating, if you do that, is you're not a leader. And so nobody's going to follow you. So this business of communication, and by the way, Russians particularly, I can say that because I love your country. I've been here 16 years, and I've been in 10 other countries. Russians particularly love to watch body language. Right? The boss looks like he's in a good mood today. Let's go and ask for a salary increase. You know, or, oh dear, he looks really grumpy. You know, I don't think we'd better go near him today. Now, unfortunately, there's nothing I can do about this face of mine. And when I'm tired, I look grumpy. So as I was almost permanently tired, everybody assumed that I was permanently grumpy. You've got to understand that you are communicating on lots of different levels. And one of the things that you should do is you should get out and into the corridors and talk to people. Because people are nervous. They are very concerned. By the way, again, particularly in a Russian context, where the boss is the boss, and everything flows from that office. It's very inefficient, folks. I mean, I know where it comes from. It comes from a lot of things that came down through the last 100 years. But honestly, if you wait for the boss to tell you what to do, it gets pretty clogged up in his outer office. So communication, external, internal, verbal, and written. How to judge people. How do I judge all of you as I look around? No, the fact is, it's not that easy. And again, this is something. I went to a course 30 years ago, and it was very cute. They taught us how to read an office. So here I'm going to pass on how to read an office. This is going to be very helpful to you. When you walk into an office, you can spot 3 different characteristics, 3 different personality types. Okay, what are they? Come on. What are the 3 types of personality? Oh, no, they can shut out. That's for internet translation. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Well, if you've got one, you're going to have to throw it around a bit. What are the 3 personality types, do you think? If you walked into someone's office.
The person who doesn't pay attention.
Somebody that doesn't pay attention. Yeah, that's very possible. Yeah. What else? Sorry?
The person who has a
critical. Critical. Well, you know, actually it's very interesting. You're both choosing sort of characteristics, but maybe I should have said, how are you going to react? I mean, you know, it's true. Somebody that's critical, somebody that's not paying attention, but there's some other things that are sort of more visible.
Maybe a secretary sitting at...
The secretary outside. So you walk in, you walk down a long corridor, there's a fierce secretary with big glasses, and she stares at you.
I mean, somebody who's sitting on reception if you're walking into the big office.
Aha,
and their reaction to you, whether they are very, you know, kind and...
Are they welcoming? Yeah, absolutely. It's the first, you know, the first contact you have in a building is the foyer. You walk into the foyer. Is it a small foyer? Is it a big foyer? Then you have the receptionist. Of course, in Russia, you then have the guy that very slowly writes the proposed. You know, and that happens, and the queue gets longer and longer, but he doesn't speed up. You know, but that's just just the process. And then you go upstairs in the elevator, and then you go towards the chief executive's office, and there outside. There's a huge door and a fierce-looking secretary, or there's, you know, a nice warm environment, and the secretary's kind and welcoming, because actually you're very nervous, and you start to imagine all sorts of things because of the way the secretary reacts to you. So that's very good. Yes, I agree with that. What else? That's the only things? The bad secretary? Okay, the door opened. Now you're inside the office. What are you gonna? You're gonna look around into that office.
Maybe the decorations of that.
So you look into an office. If you walked into an office and you looked around, what are the alternative types of office, do you think?
Small offices and...
Small offices, big offices, corner offices, offices with no windows, offices that have Monet paintings on the walls, offices that don't have Monet paintings on the walls. What else?
Someone who works from 9 to 5 doesn't apply themselves to the job.
Aha! You see, I'm delighted you said that, because one of my points will be effectiveness, not busyness. Now, you know, it's a perfectly reasonable thing for you to say 9 to 5, and you know, if they work from 9 to 5, they don't really work hard. And I think in the early stage of your career, do work hard, work long hours, spend the time. But I can tell you over time, it's how effective you are, not how long you work. Efficiency, not busyness. But you know, let's take another thing. You look in that office. It's full of paper, it's all over the place, it's very messy. You know, there's papers everywhere, it's not organized. That will give you some sort of idea of how the guy thinks. Anything else? Okay, I'll tell you what this course said, and I can assure you it doesn't cover everything. It says there are 3 needs: power, achievement, affiliation. When you walk in the door, if you walk in, it's a long corridor with a grumpy secretary at the end, and very, very high ceilings. And when you walk in, you open the doors, it's a massive office with a big desk. The guy needs power. If you walk through the door and you walk in the door, and on the guy's table are pictures of his dog, his wife, maybe his mistress, or what's a male? Her lover. There are family photographs, you know, the kids. Then he has a need for affiliation. And finally, if up on the wall there are these diplomas that show what they have achieved, they have a need for achievement. Now, I mean, this is not what I suggest you think the world is comprised of, only 3 types. But the point that's interesting about this is people do reflect in certain ways, in physical ways, parts of their character. And over time, I have found that these small hints, and I'm not trying to say that there are only 3 types, and I'm not trying to say that if a guy has a diploma on the wall, he's only interested in achievement, and if he has pictures of the kids, he's only interested in affiliation. But you will find over time that you can read a room, and from that room you can often understand something about the person you're talking to. But clearly, unfortunately, the reason I tell that story is not because I think that's what you should do. It is by showing you that even at the very basic level, even if you create some sort of understanding, it won't cover all circumstances. And again, this business of how to judge existing and proposed management is about putting them in situations over time where you get to see more than their office, as it were. Coaching and interaction with staff. As I say, you are constantly on display. How do you react with your staff? I'm going to spend some time on how to run a meeting because it's simple. It's a simple set of skills, but critical. Now, what is the one thing you're not going to get again?
First impression.
What? Oh, actually, no, that's very good. That's very true as well. Absolutely right. Sorry. Okay, what's something else you're not going to get again? No. What? Yes. Gosh, this is a... See, that's the trouble. If you talk to too smart a group, it doesn't work. You know, if you talk to a group that isn't all turned on, then it can take like a minute before anybody answers, and then you can say the one thing you're not going to get again is the minute you just spent thinking about the one thing you're not going to get again, which is time. And time management, how you manage through your day, it doesn't matter how well you're able to communicate or what your plans are. If you can't manage your time, you will never, the one thing I can guarantee you in your careers, you will never have enough time to do everything. And it is about how you prioritize your time and how you use your time efficiently that will allow you to be able to cycle through all the things that you have to do. Marketing capabilities and strong credit skills are also elements, but I'm not going to dwell on them. So in communication, start with the end in mind. Work out what it is that you're trying to communicate and structure the communication so that it's logical. If you say that's what we're going to... You know, there's an old saying, which is when you want to say something to someone, tell them what you want to say it, and once you've said it, tell them again. Because you can't, and this is why I actually don't really like doing long lectures, because you can't absorb a huge amount of information. You really have to keep the communication as simple as possible. Know your audience. Well, I know my audience here because it's the smartest of the smart, I know that. But the fact is that if you walk in and you start talking risk management to undergraduates, or if you talk, as I do sometimes with CEOs and CFOs, you have to understand what the audience brings into the room, because you then can guide, you can then decide what level you're going to communicate at. And time management. You'll run out of time if you don't know how to manage it. In judging management, it's often what is unsaid that is as important as what is said. I'm afraid that this sort of thing is really where I can show you a few pointers, but really each one of these pointers takes quite a while to develop. But people leave unsaid some of the most important things that they worry about. And one of the things you develop is how to spot where there's no shadow. Triangulate questions, which is simply, don't do it too obviously, but I would normally have a meeting with management over a 1.5 hour period if it was an important discussion. And I would try and ask the same question in different ways to see if I got the same answer. Anybody that's traveled on El Al will know that they have security agents that ask a series of questions from different perspectives and then compare notes to check that the story is the same. It's the same idea here. CVs. I'm sure that you all have CV, well, I don't know if you all have CV classes, but CVs are your mode of communication to the person that may be making a decision about you. And on your CV, you have to be able to get people's attention in a way that really highlights your best characteristics as well as your core skills. One of the problems that I saw in the early thousands, and I'm afraid that it may come back, which is one of the issues that happens in Russia because of its rapid growth, is what I call title inflation, which means that young people move from one job to another very quickly because they're riding an expanding organization, but they don't stay long enough to develop the skills for any one of their roles. Well, you can be lucky, and your skills may not be tested. But certainly one of the things you should balance is how quickly you want to progress with how much you actually learn in each of your roles. And as somebody that reads your CVs, if you present a CV that claims too much, an experienced interviewer will find a way of asking the question you can't answer. And once your CV has been punctured because you aren't able to sustain a point that you've made in it, nothing else in the CV will really help you. And I'm sure that you've been told this as well. Try and find an angle. Try and find something about what you've achieved that demonstrates a specific characteristic that may put you aside from the rest. I'm in a lucky position that there's almost, well, this is a very big statement. I'm in a lucky position that I've worked here long enough that when I was hiring bankers, I could normally call 1 or 2 people before I could find somebody that person had worked for before. And being able to reach out to get personal references is by far and away the best coordinator of what people are really like. Of course, you have to filter the person giving the reference for the reference. So if somebody always gives people great references and they say this person is great, well, you have to devalue that by the fact that everybody is great for them. When you deal in any management situation, always make sure there's a backup. Never allow yourself to be hostage to any particular manager. And in any new manager situation, given what happened to me, and that's a longer story for another time, a new manager assimilation, which is where you get the opportunity to share your background with the people that you will work with, is very helpful. I've already said this. Leaders lead, managers manage, don't get confused. The communication skills we've dealt with. This business of key performance indicators, you know, you've got to, it's a bit like when I said that the CEO has to have that dialogue with the shareholders. You better start with a clear, transparent set of goals that you've agreed, so that when you are held accountable, there is a clarity about that communication. I think I've talked about the others. Guys, I'm just lecturing. I'm not giving you the opportunity to ask questions, maybe because you don't want to ask any questions.
I have a question.
Great.
What do you think about women in business? And can you give an example of any negative positive experience with us?
Okay, with you, completely different race, yeah, okay. Well, I have had the opportunity of working for some extremely strong women. And I don't think I better mention any names. You know, women carry the advantage that men sometimes underestimate them. And that is like camouflage sometimes. In other words, I have been in situations where, not with me, because my sister's a doctor and I understood from sort of the get-go that, you know, there were a set of very competent women out there. But I think that women have an advantage in that sometimes men won't see them as direct competitors. And strong women are much more capable than strong men. So I think on the one hand, that's a benefit. Now, I think where that sort of falls apart and where it's more difficult is where you get into the boys' club. You know, where you have such a strong set of male management that they don't let the woman into the room when they want to, you know, talk about boy things. And clearly women well, no, they could, of course they could, but they shouldn't try and be one of the boys on that level, because you're not. You're one of the girls. And the girls can have the girls' club. I mean, in other words, I'm just saying that I think to try and ignore the fact that there are two sexes when there are two sexes is ridiculous. I think in terms of competence and capacity, some of the strongest people I've ever worked for, who have the most incisive minds, who have the most incredible amount of energy, are women. I mean, I used to do restructurings. Just for a minute, I'll explain restructurings because it'll allow me to talk about the woman I dealt with there. Restructurings are very complex because, well, the first thing I'd say is I want to picture the scene. In a restructuring, one of the things that you do is you find out that your company, I'm talking about as a bank, you find out the company you're going to represent has nothing but bad news to tell its bankers. And you find that out before the other bankers. So a company that has, let's say, 50 bankers, let's imagine this is the banking syndicate. You know about the bad news before anybody else, and then you have to have a meeting at which you call everybody in. They don't know why they're coming to the meeting. Maybe they suspect. And then up on the board, you put up nothing but bad news. Okay? Now, everybody in the room on that first bank meeting, or almost everybody, will have been involved in making that loan to that company. And therefore, their personal equity, their sweat equity, their credibility will be on the line. And there will be a group of people there, sitting there thinking, geez, this is terrible for me. Not just for the company, but for me, because I went and represented this company to my management. To be able to control that room, you have to be smarter, more aggressive, more in control of the numbers, more direct than anybody in the room. Otherwise, you won't be able to control the room, because bankers have big egos. So every one of those bankers thinks that they're the boss. Well, the most effective woman I've ever seen, most effective person I've ever seen in a restructuring was a woman. And she would come in and she would be so precise and logical that by the time that restructuring meeting had ended, pretty much everybody in the room understood who the boss was. So I don't know, I don't really have, I mean, there isn't a sort of special way of dealing with women. You know, I think anybody that runs into a strong woman in business will find out very quickly that women are equal to or superior to men in a lot of situations in business. So I don't know if that answers the question. But there's no special way, you know, there's no, I think to pretend that the difference in sex isn't there is silly because it is, but I equally think that to assume that that difference either shows a weakness or a strength either way is also a mistake. And it's actually only through experience that you get to that point. Any other questions? I love questions like that. Yeah?
Is there some formula for success?
Is there a formula for success? This is where I I reach into my pocket and I pull it out. Is there a formula for success? I think don't get ahead of yourself. Don't think you're bigger than you are. I think have a clear long-term set of goals and don't lose sight of them. Get up early, work late when you start. Have the courage to get up when you're knocked down. I would say that is, in my experience, one of the differentiators, because I think everybody gets knocked down. And the difference between success and failure isn't whether you're knocked down or not, it's how you pick yourself up. I'm not sure that people reach success and listen, the other thing is define success. I mean, success doesn't necessarily mean being a CEO. It doesn't necessarily mean having a huge amount of money. You can define success on many different levels. So I think before you come up with a sort of formula for success, the first thing is to decide, the real first thing is, what is success for you? And that may not be what is success for everybody in the street. Any other questions? I can. Yes, do you have a question?
Do you think that leaders are made or they're born?
Are leaders made or are they born? Well, luckily for most of us, they're made. Because it would be sad if at the outset there were little leader babies and little follower babies. Now and I also think, by the way, that because I read quite a lot about biographies of great leaders, that do leaders lead or do they, in other words, an environment can create a leader. A perfect example is Churchill. That Churchill in peacetime was just a pain in the arse. He was just no use to anybody really, because he was very extreme. But come the time, those characteristics became superb. And I think leadership is in part determined by the environment. And I certainly think these characteristics that I was talking about, these don't fit everybody, and some people are never going to achieve that set of characteristics. And so, yes, perhaps what I would say is there are some born non-leaders. Maybe it's not that there are born leaders, but there are some people who are born not to lead. And unfortunately, those people will probably, no matter what they do, not be in a position to find their way. There are others who may lead, who may not lead. And it's the way they deal with life that will determine whether or not they have that opportunity to create those characteristics that are leader characteristics.
The most famous leaders, they are very charismatic, and as we all know. And the thing is, do you think that charisma is something that can be made or created for your lifetime?
Oh, well, that's my new website, Charisma R Us. You just go online and you buy it in packets of $10 a packet. Charisma, first of all, charisma is a very misunderstood term. Charisma for some people is a real turn-off for others. I think that charisma there's no one set of characteristics that create charisma. And actually, I think charisma is simply a set of these characteristics pulled together. And because I've just said that I think you develop these characteristics through experience as life goes by. Now, some people are very lucky and they end up, they start with charisma. But other people, it's really their experience over time that creates, quote, charisma, which is nothing more than a set of communication skills combined with experience. That's what charisma is, and maybe looks. But generally, it is stuff that you can acquire along the way. So no, I think it's something that you acquire along the way, if you acquire it at all. Okay, how to run a meeting. I'm in danger of not running my meeting very well, so I'll just run through some issues about how to run a meeting. First of all, if you don't have an agenda, you can't get through the meeting. If people don't know what that agenda is ahead of time, you can't get through that meeting. Has anybody seen John Cleese? Does anybody know who John Cleese is? Fawlty Towers, Monty Python. I'm talking to the wrong generation. Okay, he's a very, very amusing English guy, and he does some very amusing training films. If you get online, you see John Cleese. He does these send-ups of meetings without an agenda. You've all been to them, or if you haven't, you will go to them, where there's a guy who calls, or a girl that calls a meeting, doesn't have an agenda, and spends a lot of time chasing around and around and around without actually getting anywhere. So, having a clear agenda with a set of purposes and decisions to be made. A meeting, the result of a meeting is a set of decisions. A meeting isn't about sitting around. I mean, you can do that, but it isn't going to move your organization forward. Make sure that the people that come to the meeting have enough information before they get to the meeting to have a point of view. The worst thing that I've had are meetings where there's a significant amount of material that is presented as you walk through the door. So you then have one group of people who know the material and the other group of people who are sitting in front of a big 50-page pack of material, and there is no way they're going to get through it and be useful. People are only as useful as the information they bring into that room. I call the next one the Bolshoi rules. Who's been to the Bolshoi? Anybody been to the Bolshoi? Oh, good, some, good. Okay, what happens if you turn up late at the Bolshoi? Do you get in? No chance at all. There are these fearsome women that stand there, and if you're late, and you're going to have to wait till the interval. Now, why is that important? Why do you think it's important to start a meeting on time? What does it? There's two reasons why, at least two reasons why this is a bad idea.
It affects your reputation if you're late.
Yeah, why does it affect your reputation if you're late?
Because it's generally accepted that you have to be on time.
Okay, but there's a logical reason for that, and I can explain it. If you call a group of 10 people to a meeting and you are 15 minutes late, what are you telling those 10 people? Yeah, yeah. Your time is more valuable than their time. They can sit there for 15 minutes or an hour or however long it takes because your time is actually 10 times more important than their time because there's 10 of them. So, you know, the first reason that you start a meeting on time is because it is respectful. And the second reason why you start a meeting on time is that if you don't start a meeting on time and you let people turn up late, people turn up late because there's no discipline. So if the first time you have a meeting on, I don't know, let's say salary, bonuses, something like that people care about, they get to the door, they try and open the door and you say you're not allowed into the meeting, they get the point that they better turn up on time the next time. And that's the only way you'll create discipline, is by showing that a meeting starts on time. And if you have that sort of discipline, you'll be far more efficient. So the Bolshoi rule. Listen first and only comment after others. The trouble about being the CEO, particularly in Russia, is that everybody sort of waits to hear what you have to say before they show their point of view. If you always speak first because you're the boss, you're not going to understand what anybody else's position is because they don't want to say it until they listen to you. So listen first is always a rule of any chairman. If you decide that you want to hog the limelight, you will never benefit from the value of the people around you. Don't let meetings overrun, so this one will not. I think we should... I don't know when you have to leave, but I think we should finish at around 6, and maximum. Rapidly produce and circulate, and I know how to spell agreed, I just didn't spell it here. Rapidly produce an agreed agenda. Now, anybody that's been in one of my meetings will also tell you that you will never come out of a meeting without knowing a couple of things from me. You will know what we have agreed to do. You will know who's agreed to do it, and you will know by when. Because if you don't know what we've agreed to do, and you don't know who's responsible for doing it, and you haven't agreed to a deadline, there is no forward momentum. And I used to talk about two types of deadline, a Chihuahua deadline and a Doberman deadline. A Chihuahua deadline was a little cute dog that when you got close to the deadline, you just kicked it out the way. And a Doberman deadline was a deadline where you realized you better meet it. And one of the things about these deadlines is that if you set unrealistic deadlines, oh, I'm going to do everything next week, well, you know, next week comes and you go, sorry, I haven't done everything. If you're the chairman of that meeting, make sure that what you do is you set realistic goals, because people are only going to be able to do what they can do. And so if they don't allow people to overpromise. Under-promise, over-deliver. It's a good sort of thing to remember. If you do too much of that, if you under-promise too much and you over-deliver too much, people will get the point and then you won't be able to pull it off. But generally, if you under-promise and over-deliver, you will surprise people positively and maintain momentum. Yeah, time management. Now, a lot of people think that as a CEO or a big manager, you should have an open door policy. What do you think that means in practice, an open door policy? What does an open door policy suggest? If I'm sitting in my office and the door's open and I've gone up to everybody and I've said, listen, anytime you feel like chatting, you know, come by. What does that mean? What happens?
Open door policy means that you should interact with as many people, as many companies as you can, in order to find different chances.
That is very true about what it should be. Now I'm actually, it's a little unfair to ask the question, what do you think actually happens? Because maybe you haven't had this experience. I'll tell you what happens. Hey, my door is always open. Anytime you want to come by, come by. And then you get the guy in the corner who thinks it's his job to come and tell you everything all the time. He walks through the open door, he sits down in front of you, he tells you his life story, you're not interested, the phone's ringing, but you've got an open door policy, so there he is, you finally get rid of him, and then somebody else wanders by, nobody's here. They sit down, they take up your time. You get to the end of the day, and you haven't got through your agenda, you've got through everybody else's agenda. Now, there is the point that you make, which is that you have to connect with as many people as possible to get as much feedback as possible, to be as effective as possible, because if you don't listen, if you don't learn, then you will not move forward. But the fact is that, in my opinion, and of course, you know, my opinion might be wrong, but in my opinion, what you have to do is you have to build certain periods of time when the door is open, and certain periods of time when it is definitely not. And so what I was always doing as a chief executive was to put my meetings as 40-minute meetings. You either got a 20-minute meeting or a 40-minute meeting. Every hour I built in 20 minutes. Why? Because meetings overrun. And the worst thing that can happen is that I have a 40-minute meeting that becomes 50 minutes. And if I have a meeting that's scheduled immediately after 40 minutes, guess what the first thing I do is I'm late for the next meeting. And what does that say? Well, it says I don't respect your time because my time is more important than your time. So if you don't build a suspension into your managing, by the way, having a great personal assistant, it can be the difference between success and failure in my view, because they leverage your capability, they leverage your efficiency. So if you build in what I call fire breaks into your diary, then that means that if one meeting overruns, it doesn't push through into all the other meetings. You then create times that you're available, and very, very, very important, which actually took me a long time to get used to, is get out of your office and walk around for no reason at all. You know, I would go to the bathroom as far away from my office as I could find. Of course, people would work that out and then they'd work out how to intercept me. But, you know, the fact was that it was important for me to walk through the building because people could see that I was there. I'd stop every now and then. I would talk to people for no particular reason. But that just created an environment that at the point where somebody has something to raise, they feel open to do that. If you stay in your office, whether the door's open or closed, people don't know who you are. I teach a very interesting case. It's the Columbia and Challenger disasters. These are the shuttle disasters in the States. One blew up on the way up, one blew up on the way down. And the problem in one of those cases, on the one that went up and blew up on the way down, was that there was an engineer in the room that was analyzing the tile failure on the shuttle, who felt that the culture of that NASA organization was such that they couldn't raise the issue with the senior manager. And in any organization, people closest to the problem may well know far more than your managers. And you have to create an atmosphere where people are prepared to approach you. Because if you don't, people won't. So this business of open door, actually I would say it's a closed door unless you make it aggressively open. So you're either in your office with the door closed because you're in meetings, or you're out of your office and you're moving through the office in a way that people see you. And I also felt it was very important to create thought zones, because a fundamental thing, where is it? It isn't here. It's somewhere else. A fundamental point, if you take nothing else away from today, take this away. Do not let the urgent crowd out the important. Do not let, remember communication, say it 3 times. Do not let the urgent crowd out the important. Every day in your business lives, you will have 100 things to do. And we are all humans. And I actually say that one of the things you have to understand about business is just the interaction of humans. And humans like to tick things off. We like to feel as though we're making progress. So if we have 100 things to do, and they're all sort of urgent but not very difficult, we'll do them from 1 to 80. And the bottom 20 we won't get to. Now, it's also human nature that if something isn't due tomorrow and something else is due tomorrow, that you focus on the thing that's due tomorrow, because that's the way these situations occur. But if you have a long-term urgent project, it won't be urgent until it's too late. Because if it's long-term, and a typical one, for instance, is how to analyze the marketplace, strategy, long-term strategy. Well, you know, you don't have to do that today. You probably don't have to do that tomorrow or next week. But if after a couple of months you haven't done it, it's too late. You are now following some other tactic that isn't a strategy. So you have to decide, and one of the things, honestly, that I did was that I loved keeping lists just like everybody else. And so I keep a very long list. And I would circle in red the 3 things, whatever it was, that I felt that week, not that day, that week, I had to get done. And if I got as far as Thursday and I hadn't dealt with them, I would get into my closed door, quiet zone, and I'd deal with them. Because never let the urgent crowd out the important. Did we get that? Never let the urgent. No, not more than 3 times. Okay, work out if you're a morning or an evening person. Some people work best in the evening, some people work best in the morning. Don't put a morning person into an evening slot, don't put an evening person into a morning slot. Doesn't work. And as I said earlier, the goal is effectiveness, not busyness. Now, sorry about this, but as you start your career, I'm afraid you're going to have to spend a lot of time being busy. It's just the way it is. As you progress, so you have to become more effective because you have more control over your time. You see, your time is somebody else's when you start, and somebody else's time is yours after a while. So when your time is somebody else's, it's actually quite a relaxing place to be because you only have to work 14 hours a day because somebody else tells you to. But when you get into a position where your time, you are managing other people's time, you have to be effective about how you do that. And that's where you have to be effective, not busy. That's, I'm afraid, the name of the game. Any questions on that? I'm sort of hoping. Any questions on anything so far? Wide open. Yeah? Yes. What is your question about work-life balance? Where is it?
Well, like how to, say, mix, fuse this serious business with life. I mean, with personal development,
Right.
studying.
Okay. Well, you know, I can't remember the saying, you know, and it's a very good saying. If anybody can, please help me out. Nobody's going to stand at your grave giving you a round of applause because you emptied your in tray. Nobody is going to celebrate a life spent making sure that their office life was successful. And if I look at my friends, and I'm very, very fortunate because most of my friends are outside of banking and outside of business, actually, a lot of them. The definition to me of success is a life well lived. And a life well lived is one that doesn't necessarily focus on their professional lives. Now, you've got to be careful here because you also have to feed your professional life. And this comes back to, and when you talk about work-life balance, if you get it too out of kilter, out of balance, you will end up where you can't, you know, the traditional one is, I was too busy, I didn't have enough time for my kids. And, you know, I was very lucky because I had my son quite late in life, so I was able to make sure I gave him enough time. But for many young professionals, as they're going through that period of their lives where it's 14 hours because it's somebody else's time, that's unfortunately where the problem comes because they're not in a position to take back their time. And I'm afraid that complication of how you balance the early stages of your professional life with your family commitments is probably the most challenging. But what I would tell you is if you don't find a way of doing that and you end up divorced or you end up, you know, unconnected to your kids, retracing those steps is extremely difficult. And so even though it may feel extremely awkward at the time, making sure there's enough time for those essential parts of your life that will continue throughout your life has to be there. I think, you know, also valuing people. I mean, I know this sounds a bit corny, but at the end of the day, how you treat other people is how you expect to be treated yourself. And if you're and by the way, why am I able to talk like this? It's because I used people in my professional life for a period of time. And I can assure you, you get what you give. And if you use people, they'll use you back. And I just don't recommend it. So it's really, it's something I can tell you because it's something that happened to me, is that ultimately you need to treat people as you want to be treated. And don't think you can get away, there's any shortcut to that. So, and then if, I mean, this is a personal thing. I personally found having friends outside of my business life, as designers, you know, artists, whatever, that allowed me never to get too concentrated into my business, which I thought was, you know, important. Any other sort of life questions that I can solve? Yes?
Do you have some regrets or something that you really want to change in your career?
For those of you that didn't hear, is there anything I'd like to change about my career? I've thought about this. And I've thought, you know, if I had been smarter, more patient, less angry, less arrogant, less of a user of people, I would have ended up in a different place. But in a way, because of the fact that I've had to deal with the repercussions of those things, and I've had to deal with them, I've actually ended up in a better place. Because I'm now what I enjoy doing is this. Which is to pass on experience that I've had. And I think maybe if I was the global head of something, I wouldn't have any of my own time, I wouldn't have as much time as I do for my son, and I wouldn't have time to teach. So actually, I think it's worked out quite well. So no, I don't have any regrets. And actually, if you look at my career in 11 countries, 16 years as a CEO, it wasn't so bad. I mean, it wasn't the best in the world, but it wasn't a bad one. And it gave me enough experience. Does that answer the question?
Lucky you are.
Sorry?
Lucky you are.
Lucky, yeah, thanks. Any other? Well, I don't know about that. There's a lot of downside. Listen, just in case you think this was some advert for what a great life I've had, if you move country every 2 years, you know, you don't generate a lot of roots. You know, if you're constantly moving from country to country, the good news is you become a global citizen. The bad news is, where do you come from? So don't think it's, you know, and then of course, do I come from Russia? Clearly not. You know, Gavru очень плохо говорит по-русски. So, you know, it gets more complicated. Okay. I think I better move on. Marketing skills. And we've got 15 minutes, guys. So if you're bursting with a question, you've got to burst in with a question. Anybody bursting with a question? Okay. In marketing, brand, what is brand? Does anybody know what a brand is? Does anybody know why brands are important? Why are brands important?
They're well known everywhere.
They're well known everywhere. What does that mean? Why is that economically valuable? Sorry? And why is an image of a company important? Now let's just pretend that I'm a hard-nosed businessman, right? I don't care about all this fluffy stuff. Why is the image important? Yep.
Of course, you can distinguish this particular company from that particular company because of its brand.
Yes, and? Now I know the difference between, you know, Stüarta Lawson Cola and Coca-Cola. So what? There's a reason. Okay. The reason it's important is it allows you super pricing for the same product. It allows you to charge a premium price for the same product. When I say the same, I mean a branded product versus an unbranded product. The brand has premium pricing because it encapsulates a series of elements. And people make the mistake of thinking that brands is just about marketing. It isn't about marketing because marketing won't help you if you don't deliver against the customer promise. There is no point in saying to people, this razor is the sharpest razor, it'll shave you closer than any other razor if it doesn't. There's no point in saying you are a superb customer service bank unless you are. So when you create a brand, it is far more than the image that you are projecting. It is the image backed by the product and the customer service. When you deal with marketing, you have to decide which brand image you want to produce and what your price point is. Because if you create a premium brand as a marketing, and you don't follow that through with customer service, which is far more expensive. The product and the customer service is more expensive than the marketing a lot of the time. Then the one thing that I can tell you from my experience of launching banks is if you don't deliver against your promise, you don't make the second sale. You only launch once. You only sell your product as a premium brand once if it isn't a premium brand. And so when you make these decisions about what your goals are for the brand, you have to be realistic about whether or not you can deliver against that promise. Then, obviously, you need to be able to determine how best to reach your customer. There's no point in trying to sell HSBC Premier by putting up advertising in parahods by big railway stations. You know, you need to be in airline lounges and you need to be against premium sector. So you need to decide what channels you're going to use. And that is combined with knowing who is your audience. Now, you know, you have to segment the market. Because, again, you need to decide what channels, what brand, what customer promise. When you deal with agencies, everybody thinks you get a bunch of creative people in groovy suits and you sit in smart offices and you have cocktails. It isn't like that. This is about being very precise on what your brand promise, your brand allocation against your target market. And make sure, and you see that, by the way, another thing that I've noticed, everybody is an expert on marketing. You put a bunch of people in a room and every single one of them is an expert. Why? Because they have a point of view. Now, the fact is, they're not the target audience. So if you're selling to, it will normally be this way, low-income groups, and you have a bunch of people with expensive watches deciding what they think the low-income group wants, They're not in a position to make that judgment. You need to go to the target audience and find out what they want. The same with a bunch of fat guys making decisions about Nike running shoes. You know, you need to know, you need to have appropriate target audiences in the focus groups. I had great fun with a brand called Soyuznik. Has anybody ever heard of Soyuznik? I'm kind of depressed because none of you have probably. Well, Google it, Soyuznik. It was a great brand. It was a student brand, part of Soyuz Bank, and it was aimed at the student population. And what we did is we took the whole concept of a plastic card and turned it upside down. I'm not going to go into a whole Soyuznik presentation, but if you go online, you can. It was designed with Artyom Lebedev Studios, and it's still online, so go and see it. And you can use non-standard channels to reach your audience, and it will create a viral effect, much more effective in some cases than being a straight above-the-line advertising campaign. Also, and this applies to any change, if you don't know where you are and you don't know where you're going, you won't get there. And you start from having to know where you are. You can't measure change unless you measure your starting point. So, in any brand, and by the way, in any change process, make sure you start by creating a baseline. I'm not going to talk about credit skills, it's far too boring. Questions? None? I have 8 minutes. So we have 8 minutes to run through the first day's checklist. On your marks, get set, go. Okay, we've talked about this. Understand the criteria that drive the shareholder's definition of success. Let me tell you something. You will never change perception of another person. Never go into a room and say, listen, I'm like this. How you perceive me is wrong. Because how you are perceived by somebody else is their perception. You can't take that away. So perception is reality for the person that is going through that perception. And your shareholder will perceive your progress in the way that they have defined. So make sure you've understood what their return on capital, market share, and public image messaging is. Because sometimes, when we were talking about it earlier, sometimes it is important for people to have non-economic branding. It isn't necessarily true that the only point of branding is premium pricing. It can follow certain social and political requirements where you believe it is important for your business over time to be seen to be supporting the environment, for instance. Nothing that you do in your business life happens in a vacuum. You know, it would be great if it was like a business game without any changing parameters. But what you decide to do will be judged not just by what you do, but what the competition does and what the market does. And this isn't a static game where you come out and this is the set of circumstances, what are you going to do? No. This is a set of circumstances, what are you going to do? What's the competition going to do? What's the marketplace going to do? And then how are you going to react to how your competitors reacted and how the market changed? There's no substitute for owning the numbers. Ultimately, the people that understand the model in a leverage buyout, which is what I used to do, understand the deal in sufficient detail. And you have to understand how one number drives another number. It's those drivers. Because if you can't get to the root of the driver, you won't see what you have to change to make the change. And obviously build the right team. Then you have to decide which of those risks you want to hold, avoid, and increase. And to do that, you need to go through a full portfolio review, a full product review. Review your policies, practices, and procedures. When you inherit an organization, don't assume that the policies, practices, and procedures, which is the glue that holds together the enterprise, don't assume that that's going to work for you. So you need to go back not to the root, but you need to review these things. By the way, one of the things I've also said is, don't try and change everything all at once from the outside. Organizations change best when you use their own environments against themselves. If you want to cause change to happen and you radically try and change everything, it probably won't occur because there'll be too much negativity. There'll be too much defense against it. So what you want to do is you want to find ways of reaching inside the organization and using the organization's culture, practices, and procedures as a change agent. Create a 90-day plan. You know, a new leader is allowed to do new things, but a new leader becomes an old leader fairly soon. And you can get away with a lot of change in the first 3 months, which over time becomes less and less acceptable. This is just about how you get to know your business and that you should check in with your key constituents. 4 minutes. Any questions? 4 minutes, any questions? We're running out of time. Okay.
Mr. Lawson.
Yes.
I've got a question. You know, you told us about CEOs. And what is your advice for students? For 20 years, for 18 years, for teenagers who are finishing and graduating our university and starting their careers?
Very good question, Tigran. Okay. You know, some of these things apply and some of them don't. So the first thing that probably doesn't apply is that at that age, at that stage, you won't be able to rely on too much of a wealth of experience. Experience will be ahead of you. You'll have some, but much more of it is coming than is already there. So what you have to do is you have to decide, almost in a way, how you're going to acquire that experience. And one of the first things that you need to do is you need to, you know, life plans at the age of 18 or 20 aren't life plans. They are directional. They are about what type of thing you're interested in, what sort of direction you want to go in. And don't worry about it because in 3 years' time, you're still only 23 and you've got plenty of time. I mean, one of the things that I would emphasize to students is you are in a position to take some risk because you are in a position where what you do next year and the year after, you can redo in 2 or 3 years' time. So don't obsess about trying to make the right decision absolutely right the first time. Allow yourself the luxury that you can restart the clock. You're young enough. Be committed to excel at what is in front of you. You know, a lot of people start thinking, well, in 5 years' time, I'll be a vice president, you know, and then I'll have a 7 Series BMW and I'll be really cool. So all I have to worry about is, you know, how to become a vice president. Wrong. What you have to worry about, in my opinion, is how you will be great at what's in front of you today. And if what's in front of you today is studying hard and doing well at your exams and participating in the community and essentially fulfilling the time that you have available as a student, do that. Don't start, you know, planning your career too much. This is my personal view, Tigran. It's not a recipe for anything. I think when you are at the stage where you're, you know, in the process of making your decisions, be a sponge. Absorb as much information as you can. By heavens, you lucky people, you've got the internet. I had books. You have computers. I had a slide ruler. I mean, you have the efficiency of knowledge in a way that the previous generations had no concept of it. You don't have to really learn a lot of things. You just have to learn how to learn a lot of things. What a wonderful environment that is. So I would say keep the perspective as broad as possible. Don't count anything out. Spend as much time as you can being great at your subject. And don't worry about failure because you have plenty of time. So just try and make sure that you're headed in a direction that suits you. Don't let other people tell you what direction you have to go. I mean, you have to factor that in, but ultimately you're the one that's living in your skin, so you have to feel good about what you're doing. I think I'm going to end there. I think I don't want to go back into a day in the life of a CEO. I'd much rather finish on that. Thanks for the question. Are there any other questions? Well, okay, thank you all very much indeed. Thanks for your time.